My daughter called it a gift, a cruise. 7 days, the Caribbean. Just the two of us reconnecting after years of distance. She even cried when she handed me the brochure. I should have known better. At 67 years old, I had seen enough of the world to recognize when someone was being too generous for no reason. But she was my daughter, my only child. And when your child cries happy tears and says she wants to make things right, something in you just surrenders. My name is Arnold. I spent 31 years as a firefighter in Dayton, Ohio. I pulled people out of burning buildings. I carried children down ladders in the middle of the night. I know what it means to stay calm when everything around you is falling apart. I thought that experience had made me unshakable. I was wrong. Her name is not important. What she did is. Let me start at the beginning, because the beginning matters. You have to understand who she was before you can understand what she did. And you have to understand who I was and what I gave to understand why it hurt the way it did. My wife Barbara passed away 11 years ago. Ovarian cancer. We had 32 years together, and when she went, she took something from me that I still haven't gotten back. Our daughter was 29 at the time. She lived in Phoenix with her husband, a man named, well, I'll just call him my son-in-law. He sold insurance, drove a leased BMW he couldn't afford, and shook my hand too hard every time we met, the way men do when they want you to think they're stronger than they are. After Barbara died, my daughter and I drifted. I don't blame her entirely. Grief does strange things to people. Some draw closer, some run. She ran to Phoenix, to her husband, to her life. And I stayed in Dayton in the house where I had raised her, surrounded by furniture that still smelled like her mother. I retired at 62. The pension was decent, $3,400 a month, plus Social Security once I hit 66. I had also inherited a modest sum when my older brother passed, enough that I had about $280,000 sitting in a savings account and a paid-off house worth somewhere around $390,000. I was comfortable, not rich, but comfortable. My daughter knew this. She started calling more frequently about 3 years ago. At first, I was grateful. A father doesn't stop wanting to hear from his child, no matter how old either of you gets. She asked about my health, about the house, about whether I had updated my will. I told her I was fine, the house was fine, and yes, I had a will and an attorney who had helped me put it together. Then the requests started. The first one was small. Her husband's car needed repairs, something with the transmission. Could I help? $400. I said yes without hesitating. That's what fathers do. Then there was the issue with their mortgage. They had taken out a variable rate loan years earlier, and the adjustments were killing them. Could I cover 2 months while they refinanced? $6,000. I wired it to her account on a Tuesday morning. Then her husband's mother got sick and they had to fly to Florida twice, and the flights and the hotel and the medical copays added up to more than they could handle. $3,500. Yes, of course, I want to be clear. I was not a fool. I knew money was leaving my account, but she was my daughter. When Barbara was alive, we had always said that whatever we built was for the family. Barbara would have done the same thing. I told myself that's all I was doing, honoring what we had built together. The year before the cruise, I started noticing things. My daughter would ask very specific questions about my finances. Not in a warm way, the way a child might worry about a parent's retirement security. In a clinical way. How much was in the savings account now? Had I considered moving the house into a trust? Had I updated the beneficiaries on my life insurance policy? I had a $500,000 term life insurance policy that I'd carried since I was 40. My daughter was the sole beneficiary. I had never changed it after Barbara died, because honestly, I hadn't thought about it much. It was just something sitting there in a filing cabinet, a document I renewed every few years without really thinking. She knew about that policy. She had always known. I started to feel uneasy. Not dramatically, not all at once. More like a low hum in the back of my mind that I kept turning down because I didn't want to hear what it might be telling me. Then she called about the cruise. It was February. I had been dealing with a bad winter, The heating system in the house had given me trouble, and I'd spent most of January mostly indoors, which is not great for a man my age who lives alone. She called on a Sunday evening, and her voice was different. Warm, soft, the voice she had as a little girl when she wanted something badly and knew the right way to ask for it. She said she had been thinking about how little time we'd spent together since her mother passed. She said she felt guilty. She said she wanted to change that. She had found a cruise, the Royal Caribbean Harmony of the Seas, sailing out of Port Canaveral down to Nassau, Cozumel, and back. 7 days. She had already booked the cabin, she cried. Real tears, or what sounded like real tears. She said, "Dad, I just want my father back." What was I supposed to say? I drove down to Phoenix 2 weeks before the departure date to stay with her and her husband while we prepared for the trip. The visit was strange from the start. My son-in-law was quieter than usual. He had always been the type to fill silence with noise, sports talk, jokes, opinions about things he didn't understand. But during that visit, he barely spoke to me. He spent most of his time in the garage or in his office with the door closed. My daughter, on the other hand, was almost aggressively attentive. She cooked every meal. She drove me to pick up things I needed for the cruise. She sat with me on the patio each evening and asked me questions about my childhood, about my years as a firefighter, about Barbara. She wanted to know everything, as if she were suddenly trying to memorize me. I told myself she was making up for lost time. The night before we were supposed to drive to Port Canaveral, I couldn't sleep. I got up around 2 in the morning and went to the kitchen for water. The light in my son-in-law's office was on. I heard him talking in a low voice, not arguing, too measured for that, more like a conversation he was having with someone where he needed to be careful about every word. I stood in the hallway for a moment. I heard my name. I heard the words, the policy, and then I heard something that stopped me cold. I heard him say, "It'll look like an accident. People go overboard all the time." I stood very still. I want to tell you I immediately sprang into action, that all those years of training kicked in and I formulated a plan. But that's not what happened. What happened is that I walked back to the guest bedroom, sat down on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall for about an hour. People go overboard all the time. I thought about the phone calls, the financial questions, the beneficiary on my life insurance, the cruise she had booked and paid for, the son-in-law who wouldn't look at me. I thought about Barbara, and I thought about how she used to say that the hardest thing in life is recognizing the truth when you don't want it to be true. In the morning, I acted normal. I ate the eggs my daughter made. I complimented her on the coffee. I helped load the suitcases into the car. I watched my son-in-law hug her in the driveway, too long, too tight, the hug of a man saying goodbye to someone going on a mission, and I got in the passenger seat and we drove east toward Florida. I had a plan. The first thing I did was call my attorney from a rest stop in New Mexico while my daughter was in the bathroom. His name is a man I've known for 20 years, and I told him exactly what I had heard. I told him I was going on this cruise. I told him that if anything happened to me on that ship, it was not an accident. I told him the name of my daughter and her husband, and the name of the ship and the date of departure. He told me not to go. I told him I had to, because I needed to know for certain, and because if I disappeared without going, they would simply wait and try again another way. The second thing I did was call a former colleague from the fire department. He had retired 3 years before me and had gone to work doing maritime safety consulting, which sounds fancy but mostly meant he spent his days writing reports for cruise lines about evacuation procedures. He knew ships. I asked him specific questions. The third thing I did, the night before we boarded, while my daughter slept in the hotel room we were sharing in Cocoa Beach, was go through her bag. I am not proud of that. I want to be clear about that. I was not raised to go through someone else's belongings, but I also was not raised to die on a cruise ship so my daughter and her husband could collect $500,000. I found a small unlabeled prescription bottle, 6 pills. I photographed it. I found a printout of my insurance policy with the payout amount circled in blue ink. I photographed that too. I found a handwritten note in her handwriting that said only, "Starboard deck, 11 p.m., after the formal dinner." I photographed that as well. I sent all 3 photographs to my attorney that night. Then I put everything back exactly as I had found it, and I lay down on my side of the room and I closed my eyes and I did not sleep. The ship was enormous. I had never been on a cruise before. Barbara and I had always been the type to rent a cabin somewhere in the mountains and spend a week hiking and reading, and the scale of it caught me off guard. There must have been 6,000 people on that vessel. Music everywhere, pools, restaurants, a zip line running along the upper deck. My daughter was in high spirits. She bought us both tropical drinks the moment we boarded and took a photograph of us standing at the railing with the ocean behind us. She posted it on Facebook, finally getting some daddy-daughter time, so grateful. The first 2 days were normal, or as normal as anything could be when you know what you know. We ate dinner together. We watched a comedy show in the main theater. She bought me a loggerhead sea turtle keychain in Nassau because she remembered I had always liked turtles since she was a child. I held that keychain in my palm and thought, this is still my daughter. She is still the person I carried on my shoulders at the county fair when she was 6 years old. And she was also someone who had planned to kill me. Both things were true. That's the part no one tells you about betrayal. It doesn't erase the love. It just sits alongside it, poisoning it slowly. The formal dinner was on night 5, a Thursday. The ship was somewhere between Cozumel and the Florida coast, heading back. My daughter wore a blue dress. We had prime rib and baked Alaska, and she laughed more than I had seen her laugh in years. After dinner, she suggested we take a walk on the upper deck. She said the night air was good for digestion. She smiled at me the way she used to smile when she was so small and had done something clever. I told her I was tired. I said I was going to turn in early. I watched something flicker behind her eyes. Not quite disappointment, more like recalculation. I went to my cabin. I locked the door from the inside. I sat awake in the desk chair until well past midnight, listening. Around 11:15 I heard footsteps stop outside my door. A long pause, then footsteps moving away. In the morning my daughter was subdued. She picked at her breakfast. She looked at her phone too often. When I asked her what was wrong, she smiled and said nothing, just tired. We pulled back into Port Canaveral on a Saturday morning. I let my daughter hug me at the terminal. I told her I loved her. I meant it. I still mean it even now. Then I got in the rental car I had arranged separately. I had told her the cruise shuttle would take me to the airport, and I drove to the Brevard County Sheriff's Office. I had already been in contact with a detective there for 2 days. After I found the note in my daughter's bag, my attorney had made a call. The detective had done some digging. The unlabeled pills I had photographed were identified by a pharmacist contact of my attorney as a sedative, the kind that, in the right dose, causes extreme disorientation and loss of coordination. The kind that, combined with a dark deck and an ocean railing, could make an accidental fall very easy to arrange. They had also found that my son-in-law had done an internet search from his home computer 8 weeks earlier. For how long does it take to be declared legally dead after going missing at sea? Both my daughter and her husband were arrested that same afternoon. She was taken from the parking garage of the Port Canaveral cruise terminal. He was picked up at their house in Phoenix, where he had been waiting for a phone call that never came. At the arraignment, I learned the rest of what they had planned. She would administer the sedative in my drink during the formal dinner. When I was disoriented, she would guide me to the starboard deck, ostensibly for fresh air. The ship's railing on the upper deck is 42 inches high. A man who is 67 years old and unsteady on his feet and has had a few drinks at a formal dinner goes overboard in the middle of the night on the open ocean. No one finds him. His daughter, devastated, collects his life insurance within the year. They had planned it together. The prosecution would later argue that they had been planning it for at least 8 months, possibly longer. The financial pressure they were under was real. They were over $180,000 in debt, behind on the mortgage, and her husband's business had been the subject of a regulatory complaint that threatened his license. They needed money. I had money, and they had looked at me and seen a solution. I think about that a lot. Being looked at by your own child and seen not as a father, not as a person, but as a problem to be solved. The trial was 14 months later. I sat in that courtroom every day. I watched my daughter in her defendant's chair, and sometimes she would look at me, and I never looked away. I wanted her to see my face. Not with anger. I had moved past anger by then. Just my face. Her father's face. The face of the person she had decided wasn't worth keeping alive. My daughter was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. She received 22 years. Her husband received 18. Their attorneys had argued that she was the more culpable party, that she had been the one to initiate and plan, and the jury agreed. I did not feel satisfaction when the verdict was read. I had expected to. I had imagined that moment many times during the 14 months leading up to it, and in my imagination there was always some sense of release, some feeling of the weight lifting. There wasn't. There was just a room full of people and a judge reading words, and my daughter staring at the table in front of her. I drove home to Dayton that night. It was October, and the leaves were turning, and I stopped once at a rest, stopped somewhere in Indiana, and sat in the car for a while looking at the trees. I have made changes since then, significant ones. I updated my life insurance policy and removed my daughter as beneficiary, replacing her with a charitable fund that supports the families of firefighters killed in the line of duty. I updated my will. I hired an estate attorney to put the house into a trust with clear instructions. I sold the house in Dayton. 31 years in that house. I thought it would be harder to leave, but the morning the moving truck came, I realized I had been living in a monument to grief for a decade, and that Barbara, the woman I knew, the woman I loved, would have told me to get out years ago. I moved to a small town in coastal North Carolina, a place called Beaufort, where the streets are narrow and the harbor is full of old wooden boats, and no one knows who I am. I bought a modest house 2 blocks from the water. I take walks every morning. I joined a volunteer water rescue unit, which apparently is a thing I am still unable to stay away from even at 67. My daughter has written me 2 letters from the correctional facility in Perryville, Arizona. I have not responded to either one. I don't know if I ever will. Some doors, once you understand what's on the other side, you don't have to open again just because someone knocks. I think about Barbara often. I think about what she would say if I could call her right now and tell her all of this. I think she would be quiet for a long time, and then she would say something very simple, the way she always did when things got complicated. She would say, "You're still here, Arnold. That's the part that matters." She would be right. I am still here. I am still breathing. I walk along the harbor every morning, and I watch the boats, and I drink my coffee, and I think about the 31 years I spent running into burning buildings, and how I survived all of it only to almost be undone by the one person in the world I never thought to protect myself from. That's the thing about love. It makes you blind in exactly the places you most need to see. But I can see now, and I refuse to stop.